The smell hit you before anything else. Rotting citrus, bruised tomatoes, split figs bleeding their syrup onto dry, cracked earth. Every morning, before the sun had fully cleared the tree line, the same thing. Crates of rejected produce heaved over the fence from the wholesale market next door, landing in soft thuds on the corner of her land that everyone in town had quietly agreed was the most useless piece of dirt in the county. The locals called it the dead patch, and for years they were right. Nothing grew there, nothing stayed. The soil was gray and tight as packed ash, and the market workers had been dumping on it so long the ground had developed a kind of crust, fragrant, fermenting, alive in the worst possible way. Or so everyone thought. Rosa Mendez was 37 years old when she decided to stop cursing the dump and start counting it instead. She had $1,100 in her checking account, a 12-acre property she had inherited from her uncle Dario, and a lien on 3 of those acres that the county bank had quietly allowed to grow to just under $14,000. The deadline to settle was 8 months away. The rest of the farm, the 9 working acres, produced decent sweet corn and some green beans, enough to get by, not enough to save anything. Her neighbor, Gerald Fitch, who ran the wholesale fruit and vegetable distribution center that backed up against her property, had offered her $42,000 for the whole farm the previous spring. She had said no. He had smiled the kind of smile that people smile when they are very confident they will be asked again. If you have ever been counted out by someone whose smile carries that particular weight, that patient, certain I will wait you out smile, then you already know exactly what this story is about. Stay with me here, because what Rosa built from those rotting cast-offs is one of the most genuinely surprising agricultural stories I have come across. Like this video if you want to see how it ends, and drop a comment below telling me where in the world you are watching from. Knowing that keeps me going. Rosa's approach did not come from nowhere. Her uncle Dario, who had worked the same land for over 40 years before his knees gave out, had been something of a quiet obsessive about soil. He kept notebooks, dozens of them, stacked in a wooden crate in the corner of the barn, each one dated and filled in his dense, looping handwriting with observations about temperature, moisture, earthworm counts, decomposition timelines, and a rotating cast of plants he had been quietly experimenting on for decades. Dario had never made real money from the farm. He was not the kind of man people took seriously at the feed store, but he had read voraciously old texts, county extension pamphlets from the 1950s, a battered copy of a soil science manual published in the 1962, and somewhere in those notebooks, Rosa found a sentence she ended up copying onto a piece of card and pinning above her kitchen window. It read, "Every farmer throws away what the next farmer will sell for gold." She had glanced past that line dozens of times without it landing. Then, one Tuesday morning in early autumn, standing at the fence watching a market worker casually toss a full flat of overripe mangoes onto the dead patch, something clicked. The normal path would have been composting. Every farmer in the valley composted. They had large, tidy bins. They turned them on schedules. They added brown and green material in the right ratios, and they sold or used what came out. It was sensible. It worked. Rosa had 2 compost bins herself, but Dario's notebooks kept circling something different, something he called deep fermentation layering, a technique he had read about in a Japanese farming text translated into Spanish that he had found secondhand in a market in the city of Tucson sometime in the late 1970s. The principle was not composting exactly. It was something older and stranger. Rosa spent 3 months reading everything she could find. She drove to the university library twice. She found papers on bokashi fermentation, on Korean natural farming, on the relationship between fungal networks and decomposition chemistry. She learned that when organic material, especially fruit with its high sugar content, breaks down in the presence of specific native microorganisms and is layered directly into the soil rather than turned in an open pile, it does not just feed the soil. It restructures it. It opens it. It changes the microbial population in ways that pure mineral fertilizers simply cannot replicate. She learned that the same soil that looked dead from above could, under the right conditions, become extraordinarily productive. The dead patch, with its years of dumped fruit fermenting in layers, might already be partway there. She just had to learn how to finish the job. Meanwhile, her neighbors at the big commercial operations down the road were doubling down on synthetic inputs. Nitrogen, phosphate, potassium in bags stacked to the ceiling of the co-op. Everyone was chasing volume. The valley had seen 3 consecutive decent years, and the mood was expansive. More acres under cultivation, more chemical support, more yield per square foot. A few farmers had invested in hydroponic setups for winter production. Gerald Fitch's distribution center was moving more volume than ever, sourcing from 12 counties now. It all looked very stable, very modern, very sensible. Rosa, meanwhile, made her first small, quiet move. She went to the county waste management office and registered as an official composting and organic waste receiver. This cost her $65 and about 2 hours of paperwork. What it meant was that she could now legally accept organic waste from commercial sources. She did not advertise this. She mentioned it to no one. She simply notified Gerald Fitch's facility in writing that she was formalizing what had already been happening informally, and that they were welcome to continue delivering organic waste to her designated area, which she had now expanded from one corner of the dead patch to the entire 1,200 square foot zone, provided it remained fruit and vegetable matter only. Gerald probably thought she was being eccentric. He countersigned the agreement and sent it back in less than a day. The actual condition of the dead patch, when Rosa finally dug into it properly with a spade and a soil testing kit she ordered online for $40, was remarkable in a specific way. The top 4 inches were indeed dense and somewhat anaerobic. Low oxygen, low worm activity, slightly acidic from the fruit acids. But below that, from about 5 inches down to roughly 14 inches, the soil was dark. Genuinely, richly dark. Not the pale gray-brown of the surrounding acres. Almost black. Dario's decades of inadvertent layering had built something. The soil test confirmed it. Organic matter content in that lower layer was nearly 11%. The surrounding acres tested at 2.4%. The surrounding commercial farms in the valley averaged somewhere between 1 and 1.8%. 11% organic matter means water retention that is nearly 3 times higher than average soil. It means a microbial population that processes nutrients so efficiently that plants in that soil can access minerals other soils simply lock away. It means, under the right management, the capacity to grow things that would be almost impossible to grow elsewhere in the same climate without enormous artificial input. Rosa understood immediately that she was not sitting on a problem. She had been sitting on a laboratory. The real work began in early spring. She had done the research, done the soil analysis, and now she committed to a specific, structured process. First, she opened the top layer of the dead patch across the full 1,200 square feet using a broad fork, a two-handled tool with long tines that aerates soil without inverting it, preserving the fungal networks that live in the upper layers. This took 3 days of hard physical work. Her back hurt for a week. She was $57 into new tools. Second, she began introducing what the Korean natural farming texts called indigenous microorganism cultures, collections of native beneficial bacteria and fungi gathered from the undisturbed forest floor at the edge of her property, cultivated in cooked rice left in the woods to capture local microbes, then mixed with raw milk to multiply them, and finally worked into the soil surface. This process sounds stranger than it is. It is essentially farming with invisible animals you already have on your land. The science behind it is documented and legitimate. Several university studies in Hawaii and the Philippines had shown measurable improvements in crop yields using similar methods. She spent $22 on raw milk from a neighbor's dairy. The forest was free. Third, she began layering the incoming market waste in a deliberate sequence. high-sugar fruit material first, covered immediately with a thin layer of dry carbonaceous material like wood chips or dry leaves to control the fermentation environment, then a light watering, then another layer, never more than 3 inches deep per cycle. Not a pile. A lasagna. Each layer fermenting into the one below it, feeding the existing microorganism population, slowly knitting itself into the living structure beneath. This phase lasted 6 weeks. She built 7 complete layers. Fourth, she planted a cover crop of white clover and daikon radish, 2 plants known for breaking up compacted subsoil and fixing nitrogen, directly into the layered surface without tilling. She had bought the seed for $31. Total investment so far, between the tools, the soil test, the paperwork, the seed, and the milk, she was at $204. A soil amendment specialist she had consulted by phone, she never met him in person, just found him through an extension service, had told her that to chemically rehabilitate 1,200 square feet of degraded soil to genuinely productive condition would cost between $3,000 and $5,000 in commercial inputs and would still not produce the kind of deep organic structure she now had waiting underneath. The cover crop came up in 11 days. Thick, uniform, the daikon radishes pushing down like white fists into the soil, cracking layers apart. She pulled them after 6 weeks, left the roots in place to decompose, and planted her actual crop. She had chosen something deliberate and specific, not by accident. Heirloom dry farm tomatoes, a variety called the Costoluto Genovese, an ancient Italian tomato with a deeply ridged, almost corrugated surface, intensely concentrated flavor, low water content, and almost no shelf life. Supermarkets would not touch them. They bruised if you looked at them wrong. They were ugly by commercial standards, misshapen, dark red, prone to cracking. Chefs loved them. Specialty grocers who supplied restaurants paid extraordinary prices for them when they were genuinely grown right. The key phrase is grown right. The Costoluto performs dramatically differently in high organic matter soil. The lack of excess water in the growing medium forces the plant to develop deep roots and concentrate its sugars. The Brick score, a measure of sugar concentration in fruit, can be nearly double what you get from the same variety grown in average soil with regular irrigation. Rosa's tomatoes, growing in that transformed dead patch in their first season, measured a Brick score of 9.4. Commercial tomatoes average between 4 and 6. A specialty organic buyer from the city, a woman named Claudia, who supplied 3 high-end restaurants and a small artisan market, drove out to the farm in late July, picked up a single fruit, bit into it standing in the field, and was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "I need all of it." Claudia paid $4.20 per pound. The mainstream wholesale rate for tomatoes that season was 62 cents per pound. Rosa's first harvest from 1,200 square feet produced 416 pounds of fruit. The math is not complicated. $1,747.12 from a patch of land that everyone had agreed was the most useless dirt in the county, from a plot she had transformed for $204. Meanwhile, the valley was having a very different summer. The 3 consecutive good years had encouraged overproduction. Too many acres planted in the same crops, supply outpacing demand, wholesale prices dropping further. Gerald Fitch's distribution center was taking losses on several product lines. 2 of the larger farms down the road had renegotiated their bank terms. The synthetic input bills had come due, and the yields, while high in volume, were not generating the margins anyone had projected. There was also the water issue. The valley had experienced a dry summer, not catastrophic, but enough to stress crops that had been grown in low organic matter soils where water retention was poor. Fields that needed irrigation 3 times a week were cracking between waterings. Rosa's dead patch, with its 11% organic matter holding water like a sponge, was irrigated once a week. The tomatoes never stressed. They thrived in the same heat that was bruising everyone else's yields. By October, the word had begun to move through the valley in the way that farming news always moves, quietly, then suddenly. She heard it from Marta at the feed store. She heard it from her cousin Eli, who heard it from someone at the co-op. People were saying that Rosa Mendez had somehow grown tomatoes worth 7 times the market rate on land that everyone knew was worthless. At the autumn growers' meeting at the county agricultural office, a drafty low building with fluorescent lights and folding chairs, she saw Gerald Fitch for the first time since the summer. He came across the room with the deliberate casualness of a man who had prepared what he was going to say. He offered her $60,000 for the farm. She told him she was not interested in selling. He told her, with that same patient smile, that the offer would not stay on the table indefinitely. She looked at him for a moment. Then she said, "Gerald, you have been throwing away the most valuable thing on my property for almost a decade. I am not selling what you paid for." The room was not silent exactly, but it got quieter. A few heads turned. Fitch's smile held for a beat, then shifted into something less certain. Rosa paid the county lien in full that November. $14,000 cleared in one payment. 11 months later, a regional food distribution company with accounts in 4 states sent a representative to the farm with an offer that included exclusive sourcing rights, a significant upfront payment, and a contract that would have secured Rosa's income for 5 years. The number attached was real, and it was large. The condition was volume. They needed her to scale, to standardize, to shift away from the heirloom varieties and toward higher-yield cultivars that were easier to transport and had longer shelf life. It was a reasonable business offer. Rosa read the contract twice, sat with it for 3 days, and sent it back unsigned. She wrote a short note with it. It said, "What made this soil is what I cannot hand over. If you want the fruit, come to where the fruit is." They came back with a modified proposal. She accepted the modified version. It was smaller in total value, but preserved everything that mattered. Variety selection, soil management, no standardization clause. She had won something harder to calculate than money. In the 2 years that followed, Rosa ran informal workshops on her property on the first Saturday of each month. She charged nothing. She showed anyone who came, young farmers, neighbors, 2 of the large-scale operators who had watched their margins shrink, exactly what she had done, step by step, science and all. She showed them Dario's notebooks. She showed them the soil test results. She showed them the Brix meter and let them taste a Costoludo from the dead patch alongside a commercial tomato from a supermarket. People always went quiet for a moment after that comparison. That quiet is something. It contains an entire education. Gerald Fitch sent his farm manager to one of the workshops. Not Gerald himself. That would have been too much. But the farm manager came, took notes, asked good questions, and Rosa answered every one of them without an ounce of satisfaction at the implied concession. Because this was never about being right. It was about what the soil already knew how to do once someone stopped throwing away what they did not understand. There is something in this story, in what Rosa did with those years of discarded fruit, that reaches past farming. Every one of us has had something thrown at us that seemed like an insult or a waste or a problem deposited by someone who thought we did not matter. Most of us try to get rid of it. We spend energy managing it, fencing it off, grieving it. Rosa's uncle Dario, in his cramped handwriting in those stacked notebooks, had understood something that takes most people a lifetime to get. The overlooked material is not a punishment. It is potential that has not been read yet. The question is whether you have the patience to learn its language before you throw it back. Think about what in your own life you have been too quick to discard. Think about what someone else has been dumping on your corner that you have not yet turned over with a broad fork and tested. The dead patch is still there. It does not look like much from the road, but if you drive past it in July, when the Costoludo plants are full and dark and heavy with those ridged, improbable, deeply red fruits, you understand that what you are looking at is not an accident. It is the result of a woman who read her uncle's notebooks, paid $65 to become an official waste receiver, and refused to agree with anyone about what her land was worth. That image, those ugly, beautiful tomatoes growing out of what used to be a dump, is the whole story. It is also, if you sit with it long enough, a fairly solid piece of life advice. If you made it all the way here, thank you genuinely. Subscribe if this kind of story is what you come here for. Leave a comment below with this question. What is the dead patch in your world right now? I read every single one,